Hello, everyone. We're here with Dr. David Ford, professor of church history at St. Tikhon's Orthodox Theological Seminary in South Canaan, Pennsylvania. Professor Ford has just published a new translation of sermons from the life of St. John Chrysostom in the popular patristic series from St. Vladimir's Seminary Press. And we're excited to talk to him today about this latest project, about his longtime devotion to St. John Chrysostom, and about his thoughts on bringing the Church Fathers and their legacy to English-speaking readers and Orthodox Christians in contemporary America. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you, Tikhon.
So you keep very busy teaching, researching, writing, translating, and doing speaking engagements. Can you tell us some of the things that you're working on right now, what you're up to in the next few months?
Well, I'm very thankful to still be teaching full-time at St. Tikhon's in my 35th year. Going strong, loving it more than ever. Always such wonderful students the Lord brings to us. So I stay busy with that. Actually, my biggest project recently has been helping my wife finish her second major book. This one is on the theme of the temple in the writings of St. John, the theologian, in his gospel, and really across all the scriptures. And she's just submitting it tomorrow. So I do have actually, Tikhon, a new idea to work further with some of the great legacy of St. John Chrysostom, looking at his letters. I have translated the 17 letters to St. Olympia, but there are over 200 other letters that are in the Minya set. So I'm looking forward to delving into those and maybe coming up with another collection of letters by him.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
These are untranslated, completely untranslated.
That's what I think. Mostly, maybe a few have been here and there. I haven't started scouting around yet, but my hunch is most of them have not appeared in English, at least in modern English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And speaking engagements, you're running around the country.
We have some different things. If I could mention the Paideia Conference,
Yes.
the second annual, that will be right at the end of May.
Yes.
We had such a wonderful time there last May. Father Paul Sievers, Dr. Seraphim Foltz, Dr. David Bradshaw, Father Hans Jacobsy. They're the four who have organized it. They're organizing this second one. We're going to have more people involved, it looks like. And actually, I'll be pursuing the theme of the mystery of male and female in my presentation there, partly in response to this idea of perhaps trying to have the deaconess office restored. So it's related to that, but yeah, I think it's very enriching and important in this day and age when there is so much minimizing of the sexual differences, and there's so much richness there, I think, as we delve more deeply into the mystery of our sexual differentiation. So I'm excited about that.
And you've done work on this because St. John writes to the deaconess Olympias.
Yes, that's part of the whole story. Yeah, well, my work, Women and Men in the Early Church, the Wisdom of St. John Chrysostom, that talks about male headship in the family, in society, and in the church. And in a way, that whole book, a lot of it, let's say, leads towards an explanation of why the Lord has ordained the male-only clergy.
And you'll be in Alabama for the symposium on the Phocian Synod of 879.
Yes, I had written a paper on that theme back in 2015, and they discovered it online, and that's how they came about inviting me. So,
can you tell us about that paper?
Well, yes, it's kind of a complicated story, but I guess in a nutshell, in 879, a major council, admittedly local in Constantinople, but called by the emperor. And in it, papal supremacy, claims of papal authority over the East are renounced, and also the filioque is renounced. And very interesting, extremely interestingly to me, the Roman Church, for the next 200 years, considered that council to be the Eighth Ecumenical Council. It was only during the Gregorian Reform in the later 1000s that the canon lawyers in the Vatican went back to the previous council of 10 years earlier, usually called the Ignatian Council, which was much more favorable towards Rome in general. But that council was more or less forgotten by the Roman Church for 200 years. If we could just come back to their affirmation of the Photian Council as the Eighth, we would be so much closer in our efforts for reconciliation, between the Roman Church and the Orthodox Church.
So where did this paper appear?
I gave it at the OTSA, Orthodox Theological Society of America. I gave it at their annual conference in 2015. And I'm actually forgetting which site it appears on, but people can track it down on the online.
We'll post it here for people who are interested.
That'd be good. That'd be good. Yeah, thank you.
So what courses are you teaching this semester at St. Tikhon's?
Yes, my standard ones for the spring, Church History 2, which picks up with the Quinisex Council. I like to call it the Sixth Council Part 2, the part that gives the canons, right? 102 remarkable canons. And that course goes up to the present, centering mainly on the Byzantine Church. We have a third course on Slavic Christianity, which I teach in the fall. And then we have a fourth. I'm sorry. I'm teaching that now myself as well. Sorry. Yeah. My fourth course is American Orthodoxy, which we teach in the fall, which is it's actually a combination of two courses: the history of Orthodoxy in America, as well as kind of a sketch of American religious history across the board, various aspects of spiritual life in America, even really starting with the Native Americans, and then picking up with the Puritans and going on from there. Major streams of Christianity in America.
So you did your doctoral dissertation at Drew University.
Yes.
On the Chrysostom.
Yes.
Looking, as you mentioned just a moment ago, on his views on men and women, a very important but also hot button issue that relates to how we read the Church Fathers today. So in 1996, this would serve as the basis for your book, Women and Men in the Early Church, the Vision of St. John Chrysostom, which you revised and expanded in 2017. Can you tell us about your educational background for the viewers who are not familiar, and what led you to work on St. John Chrysostom for your PhD thesis?
Okay. I got to Drew University in 1984. There was really no Orthodox school in America, North America, that offered a PhD. But this program at Drew in Madison, New Jersey, a Methodist institution, they offered a PhD program called Church History and Historical Theology. So right there, we can see they understand the integral connection of history and theology. And there were four men, four of the professors there, who really appreciated the early church. They appreciated, respected my orthodoxy. The man, one of those four, who ended up being the chair of my dissertation committee, Dr. James Payne, he was a British Methodist, kind of super, super high Methodist, as high as there could be. And he studied under Nicholas Zernoff at Oxford back in the 1950s and helped produce a book called the Bulgakov Anthology. So, and actually the theme of his dissertation was the Orthodox understanding of sobornost, conciliarity. Yeah. So he was very Orthodox in so many ways. He was a joy to work with. And then there was Dr. Tom Oden, who, as you may know, conceived of the project of the Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture. Such a vast, priceless, really collection, right, of church fathers commenting on the Scriptures, every book of the Bible. Yeah. And so he also had a real heart for the early church, the consensus of the fathers of the first, let's say, 8 centuries. That's where his heart really was. So he was a joy to work with. And then actually on my dissertation committee, also the third one was Father John Meyendorff from St. Vladimir's. A couple years earlier, I was blessed to take 2 courses from him, traveling to St. Vlad's, which was only about an hour away from Drew, going there once a week. And the program at Drew gave me academic credit for those 2 courses that I took with Father Meyendorff. So I was able to get, I think, a pretty substantial input, let's say, from Orthodox, from at least through St. Vladimir's and Father John Meyendorff. So that really augmented my program a lot, I would say. So comes time, I need to pick a topic for my dissertation. And in my previous journey towards Orthodoxy, for quite some time, I was in the charismatic movement, emerging out of my Presbyterian roots, then getting involved in the Presbyterian charismatic movement, into the charismatic movement in general. That's what, it was in the midst of that took me to Oral Roberts University back in 1977. And lo and behold, there was an Orthodox professor there, Dr. Ted Williams. And he's the one who he actually wasn't teaching church history there. He was teaching systematic theology, but he taught it historically. First day of class, he plunged us into the Desert Fathers. He said, I have a story I want to share with you from the Desert Fathers that starts off, this is the story of a great repentance. And it was the life of St. Pelagia the Harlot. Yeah. So it wasn't just myself. It was about 9 or 10 others in that first substantial class in the new seminary program at ORU. We were captivated. And every question we had going through that first semester seemed like Dr. Williams had an answer. Although it wasn't until the 3rd semester in that program, continuing my studies with Dr. Williams, that I realized I had nowhere else to go but to be in the Orthodox Church. And that decision actually came to me during a retreat led by Father Alexander Schmemann in Wichita, Kansas in 1978. So I owe a lot to Father Alexander as well. His presentations there were so compelling. So so back to Drew. Topic for my dissertation. I really thought of doing something with St. Simeon the New Theologian because of his use of the phrase baptism in the Spirit. Well, of course, there's a very particular context in which he's using that phrase, what he means by it in 10th century Byzantium, going into the 11th century, far different from the way modern charismatics and Pentecostals are using that phrase. Mm-hmm. But there was an Greek Orthodox priest named Father Eusebius Stefanou, who
Yes.
was teaching. You probably heard the name. He was a rising star, Tikhon, in the Greek church back in the 1960s,
And
teaching
at a
at
time when you couldn't find a lot of
oh,
scholarship on Byzantine theology.
granted that. Oh, very, very true back then. Yeah. Yeah. So he's teaching at Holy Cross in the seminary. He has started a journal called the Logos magazine in 1968. He's so eager to enliven the spiritual life of his people. You know, the lady in the GOA. But 3 years later, he gets invited to a house meeting with some Pentecostal, neo-Pentecostal charismatics, and he experiences what is known as the baptism in the Holy Spirit. And he is so swept up with that, he becomes convinced that this enthusiasm is just what we need to bring in to our Orthodox Church. He ends up then devoting his journal, which has already been in existence for 3 years. He fills it with this new orientation, baptism in the Spirit, the gifts, the emphasis on the 9 gifts of the Spirit, which St. Paul lists in 1 Corinthians 12, 8-10, including prophecy, gifts of healing, gifts of miracles, speaking in tongues, and interpretation of tongues. So he gets convinced for a really authentic, deep spiritual life, we need to be, as they say, operating in the gifts of the Spirit. Well, this was my idea then, to go back to, and meanwhile, also on his website, he was proclaiming St. Simeon the New Theologian as kind of the premier of all the church fathers. His website used to, St. Simeon towers above all the other church fathers. Wow. And I knew that wasn't the balanced consideration in Orthodoxy. Yes, we love St. Simeon, but
yeah,
we don't extol him in those terms. And I was just so convinced that if I really delved into St. Simeon, I would see the context, right, in which this emphasis on a baptism in the Spirit beyond chrismation, granted that in various ways, but just saturated with humility, with repentance, bathing, bathed in tears. These aspects we just don't see emphasized as well, in the charismatic movement. So anyway, I explained this to Father Hopko, and he said, David, I just don't think the charismatic movement is that much of a threat to our people to somehow knock them off course. He said there is a much greater threat, and that is feminism. He said, much greater challenge in the society as a whole. He said it was his suggestion. Why don't you delve into St. John Chrysostom and see what he says on issues of male and female, typical male roles, typical female roles in the family, in society, and in the church. And you see, I think partly he had in mind there were a few Orthodox scholars, even at that time in the mid-'80s, who were bringing the charge of misogynism against St. John Chrysostom. Where is this coming from? How could any faithful Orthodox accuse one of our great church fathers of hatred of women, which literally that's what misogynism means. So he suggested that I try to address the concerns of those critics of Chrysostom. Where were they coming from? How could I defend Chrysostom? And what vision could be brought forth from the writings of St. John Chrysostom on these kinds of issues, especially relating to men and women. And one of the greatest, probably, well, I know, the greatest joy that came to me out of reading Chrysostom, I was able to read him almost night and day for at least a year and a half. Wow, in doing this research, the greatest joy was coming upon his magnificent vision for marriage. Wow, just tremendously high vision of marriage. And of course, right there, you have to have a love for married people, including the women involved. I mean, and yeah. So I did my dissertation then with that theme. In '89, I graduated with that as my thesis. I did end up working with it twice, really, two major overhauls, once in the early '90s, once in the mid '90s, working much more with secondary literature. And so it was in that revised version that it came forth first in '96, Women and Men in the Early Church, the full views of St. John Chrysostom. Then 20 years later, as you mentioned, kind of a 20th anniversary edition, I worked with the main text a little more. I renamed it Women and Men in the Early Church, the vision of St. John Chrysostom. And I added two appendices. One, the letter that he wrote to the Italian women, which in itself demolishes any kind of feeling he didn't appreciate women. He's appealing to the women in the church in Rome to step up to the plate and help him because the clergy were not coming to his aid. Mm-hmm. So, the men fall down, you women have to pick up the slack. And then the second appendix, it's pretty lengthy, in light of the moral slide in our society. I brought forth his understanding of sexual sin, fornication, adultery, and homosexuality, and translated texts of his that address those issues. So that's the new volume.
It's not something I had intended to ask you about, but since we're talking about St. John's view on women, one of the things that I find interesting, and you could probably speak to this, is that St. John, while offering a traditional view of women and the roles of men and women, does not offer necessarily a conservative view of women, meaning that he doesn't want to take us back to some 1950s housewife. No. He has a very different view, more robust view of the anthropological role of the woman.
Yes, he of course male headship is very important to him. He's just reading St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 11:3. The head of the man is Christ, the head of the woman is the man, and so on. And then, of course, Ephesians 5, the wedding epistle. The husband is the head of his wife. But, 2 lines later, St. Paul is saying, you have to love your wife as Christ loves his church. And Chrysostom says, you husbands, even if it becomes necessary for you to be cut in pieces 10,000 times for your wife's sake, don't refuse it. This is our understanding of male headship in the family and in the church is very much centered in self-sacrificial servanthood. And St. John Chrysostom brings forth this vision very, very clearly. It's providing service to the women, for the men, the husband in the family, and then the clergy in the church, to bear the responsibility, the ultimate responsibility of the spiritual well-being of the family and the flock. And of course, the spiritual emphasis there, but also kind of being the ones overseeing at least, or taking care of the administrative duties, the nuts and bolts of running parish life, of running family life. But it is so much in the family a reciprocity with the husband and the wife. So many times he'll start with the wife first. He'll say, "Wives, instruct your husbands. Keep them in line." Just as often as he may say, "Husbands, instruct your wives. Share at the dinner table what you learned at the church." These kinds of things. He says there should be a healthy rivalry among all in the family, in spiritual life. So at one point he says, yes, the husband has the highest authority, but the women's authority, the elevation of the husband over the wife is slight. He says she's the second in authority. She's the second. If he's the king, she's the queen in the household. It's just a beautiful vision of the complementarity of the sexes. Yeah.
You've stayed with St. John for your whole career.
I really have.
What's been your relationship to St. John Chrysostom? What draws you to him in particular? And what would you want non-academics especially to know about St. John as a patristic author, and how can he serve as a sort of an entryway into reading the Fathers?
Well, personally, doing that reading of him in the middle 80s, I was able to read virtually everything there was in English and French at that time that he's written. And as I was saying, what he says about marriage really won my heart, because I was not married at the time, but I had a vision. I was just yearning, really, for an Orthodox wife to share the glories of our faith together with, in every possible way. So I really owe him so much for increasing my vision for marriage, and really, I think, preparing me for meeting my wife, which happened as I was still at Drew, and we had our first year of marriage as my final year at Drew. So I really feel like he got me ready for entering the great adventure of marriage. And he just, his eloquence just continued to win me over. I love words myself, and he's just a consummate wordsmith. The elegance, the beauty of his wordsmithing, and just picturing he's most likely preaching without notes, and the way the stenographers recording his preaching, they retained the conversational style, the rhetorical questions. Tell me this and this, but someone might say, but you might say, this kind of thing. And just the sheer love, Tikhon, that he conveys to his flock. It's so heartwarming. At one point, he just cries out, "I have set my heart vehemently on your salvation." Wow. So he's so endearing, and we're so enriched in our Orthodox faith. We can get to know the saints, beholding them in their icons, communing with them before the icons in prayer, and when we're gifted to have their words, to get to know them through reading their writing. It's an endless treasure. So yes, I would encourage anyone who wants to get to know Christ better to delve into the Church Fathers. And St. John is just so accessible. He's preaching to the common man. So much of the writings of the Fathers, really, there's kind of a monastic setting. They're writing to fellow monks, and all of that wisdom, of course, can have relevance for those who are married, those who are living in the world. But kind of in other ways, they're kind of more designed for the monastic setting. But Chrysostom really understands what it's like in the world. His vision really came to be, like he says, if you all really live the Christian life in this big city, either Antioch or Constantinople, the two cities where he ministered, he said there would be no need for anyone to go out of the city and find a cave somewhere. The whole city would be a monastery. That was really his vision. He said, those of you who are married, you can attain the heights of spiritual life as much as any monks. The path is open to you. And actually, at one point, when he's talking to priests who are involved in the concerns of caring for their flocks, he says, really, the prize should go to them. And by extension, to anyone who's married, if they can stay totally devoted to Christ, filled with his love, in the midst of the stresses and strains and responsibilities of life in the world. Yeah, so he's so accessible. And it's one reason I've tried to, one reason I've worked so much with doing new translations of his, at least portions of his work, to make his wisdom more accessible. And so we can really get to know him better. It
So
really as a personal guide. Yeah.
Before publishing the sermons from the life, you also translated the profoundly important and edifying letters to Saint Olympia, and a 3-volume set entitled Sing to Your Soul, a festival of wisdom from the writings of St. John Chrysostom. So this is not your first time producing an English version of St. John for a popular audience. I want to ask you, I'm curious what your experience has been translating his writings. I'm particularly interested in what you think of his Greek, in terms of difficulty, in terms of style, as a, somebody who aspires to be a translator myself.
Well, yes, of course I learned Greek through learning the Koine, the Greek of the New Testament, in seminary. I never studied Attic Greek, the pre-Christian, high Greek of the philosophers, Plato and Aristotle and so on. But the Koine was a great foundation. Chrysostom's Greek, he's writing about 4 centuries later, right? Every language is in organic process all the time. But the basic structure wasn't that much different, I found, from the Koine. The vocabulary, much richer. I was astonished, as much as I've read Chrysostom, I would still come across a word that I had never seen him use before. Thankfully, I've got that giant Liddell and Scott dictionary, which had most of them. There were even, I guess, 2 or 3, maybe even Liddell and Scott didn't have. And often, sometimes at least, he would use Attic spellings, doubling the T, doubling the S, whereas that wasn't the case in the Koine. But the richness of the vocabulary, of course, yes, the complexity of the sentence structures would be more advanced in Chrysostom than in the New Testament. The Greek there really, I think, is relatively simple compared to most of the fathers. So the experience was really almost feeling like I was there, listening to him. And as I mentioned, with the stenographers, all there in the Greek, the exclamations, the rhetorical questions, just so vivid. So
you do find his Greek as accessible as his.
It is.
Yeah.
Pardon me? Sorry.
You do find his Greek as accessible as his discourse.
Yes. Yeah. It is accessible. Yeah.
Well,
as
it's
I
good
say,
to
with the
know
help of, and of course, the more you work with one person, the more you get to know his style. You know almost what he's going to say, and that really, of course, helped me in my translation work. And to also say, I think my single guiding principle, most prominent principle, as I translated, was to keep on imagining what would St. John have sounded like if his first language had been English.
Mhm.
You know, that I know there's a temptation among some translators to try to be maybe a little overly faithful to the way it reads in the original language, word order, let's say, certain phraseology. But if it comes out stilted, when you try to retain those features as you're putting the discourse in English, if it comes out stilted, that's unfair to Chrysostom. That's how I thought. I've got to make this sound like he would have sounded. And that's the way to honor him. So certainly trying to be faithful to the meaning. Absolutely. But even there, how are you going to really convey the meaning if it's not somehow being done in the beautiful way that he would have spoken? If English had been his first language.
So what is your opinion of where we stand with older translations of St. John Chrysostom? I mean, we've been blessed to have translations in the Nicene, post-Nicene Fathers
Yes.
series, but increasingly we find that the language of these translations, 19th century translations, is increasingly unintelligible to people, and especially to students and possibly seminarians, not only because of how differently we're educated today, but also because language changes over time. We do speak differently, and we hear differently. So you're a professor in an Orthodox seminary. Can you say more about this need to translate even text that technically we do have available in English?
Yeah. We are so blessed, as you say, to have, let's say, the Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers set. 38 volumes, big gray, used to be gray anyway, volumes. But as you say, Victorian English, 1880s, 1890s, and the way it's presented on the page, very, very few paragraph breaks, double column, lengthy sentences. It is very difficult for an average reader in these days, even seminary students, to read it readily. So that's another really important reason why we do need to bring forth these treasures in modern English to make them more accessible. Yeah, even for seminary students.
So tell us about your new translation, Sermons from the Life of St. John Chrysostom. This is freshly available from Vladimir's Seminary Press. Tell us what it contains, why you chose these texts, and what we can look forward to.
Great. Yes. This collection begins with his first public sermon, the day he was ordained to the holy priesthood by Archbishop Flavian, now St. Flavian. And just that alone just so intrigued me. How could this not be readily available? Actually, I was reading J.N.D. Kelly's very nice biography of Chrysostom, and he talks about these sermons and gives the historical background of them. So that's partly what helped me inspire, what helped inspire me to look at these 9 sermons, all coming from dramatic moments in his life and making them accessible. There's such an avenue of getting to know him better. So this very first one, he was actually a deacon for 5 years in the church in Antioch, from 381 to 386. But at that time, deacons were not allowed to preach, even though he had this tremendous gift for rhetoric, which had been well honed, by his training. Through his training at the feet of the great Libanius. who was a great rhetorician living in Antioch, Chrysostom's hometown, who was one of the greatest of all the pagan rhetoricians of the Greek inheritance. So, and then he offers when he takes up the Christian life full scale, let's say, when he's around the age of 20, he brings all his natural talent, his training with Libanius, and then it's all the more heightened, enriched through the grace of the Holy Spirit. His powers of eloquence. And to see his humility in this very first sermon, he admits how scared he is. He begs the people for their prayers to sustain him as he's preaching for the first time publicly. It's heartwarming. Then the second sermon in the collection is actually the second sermon in the collection, called On the Statues. It was his preaching during Great Lent, his first Great Lent as a preacher. This would be the spring of 387. On the Thursday before Great Lent started, there was a riot in the city of Antioch protesting a newly announced tax increase. And the riot was so severe that statues of the emperor, Theodosius, and his wife and children were pulled down and desecrated. And just a hideous scene. The perpetrators were being rounded up. Some were already being executed. News, of course, reached the city was terrified that when the emperor heard, here's what has happened here, he is going to take such offense, and justifiably so, really, because if you attack a statue of the emperor, that is really a direct attack on the emperor himself. They knew he would take it that way. They knew he would be justified in whatever retribution he would bring. So these are his words then, 3 days after that devastation. The city is trembling. He says, he's almost kind of saying, wow, I've never seen this city on their knees like this ever before. This is going to be the most prayerful Lent we've ever seen. So how he comforts his people at such a time. This isn't just theoretical advice on how to be a good pastor, how to be, encouraging of your flock. This is in the throes of a desperate pastoral situation. So to see how he handles that, at first he just says, I have to grieve. I grieve with you. What can I say? But then as he works his way through comforting them, then he says, in a way, we just have to try to keep our regular life intact, trust in Christ, to pull us through this emergency. So I'm just going to preach like I would have if this riot hadn't happened. Let's just carry on, trusting the Lord, and continue to be inspired by the teaching that you would have heard anyway in this series of Lenten teachings. So that's the second one in the series. Then the third one is after the earthquake, comforting his people there. The next one is when he is fairly new in Constantinople. He has 12 years of relative peace and great glory in Antioch as the main preacher from 386 to 398. And then the patriarch of Constantinople, the new imperial city, dies. And the emperor and his wife say to themselves, wow, here we are governing the imperial city. The church here in the imperial city deserves to have the greatest preacher in the empire. St. John's preaching had the word of it had spread far and wide. So the emperor actually sends guards to come to Antioch outside the city. They call for St. John. He doesn't know what's going on, but delegates from the emperor are wanting to speak with you. So he goes out and they whisk him away to Constantinople. They don't even give him time to go back and get his books. And why is that? Because they know those hot-tempered people of Antioch will never let their beloved Chrysostom go. Never. So he's whisked away. And now he's Archbishop of Constantinople, the greatest, the leading church in the empire. This is the first great kind of momentous scene then in his years in Constantinople. This man Eutropius is the man behind the scenes, let's say, more like kind of a prime minister behind the imperial couple. Arcadius is a relative weak figure. His wife is really the stronger of the pair. And they're both very much in the care of this Eutropius. Actually, Eutropius was the one who had found Evdokia to be the wife of Arcadius, so they owe him a lot. They have personal devotion to him. But suddenly, in 399, he loses the favor of the emperor and the empress, and he flees from the imperial palace for his life. Scared, pursued, you could just picture this, pursued by the soldiers, and he bursts into the Hagia Sophia and runs up to the altar begging for mercy, assuming that he'll be safe, that this will be sanctuary, a refuge for him. The great irony, Tikhon, is that he had tried to limit the church's ability to offer sanctuary in cases of people fleeing there. So this irony is not lost, of course, on Chrysostom and on his flock. They know this man has not been a friend of the church. And here he is clinging to the altar for mercy, and they're kind of, clamoring for his blood. And Chrysostom's greatest concern, Tikhon, in this homily, one of them anyway, is to calm his people down and to encourage them to come back to their Christian understanding of showing mercy. Here he is begging for mercy. We have to forgive him. This is the Christian thing, even if he has attacked the church in the past. Oh, gosh. So he says, have I convinced you to be merciful? And he says, yes, I can tell I have from your tears. Oh, my. So that's really dramatic. Then there's a similar situation sometime afterwards, another person seeking such sanctuary. So that's the next one in the series. The one after that, I especially love. It's entitled Oration on the Relics. The setting here is in 400. Okay, this would be the next year. The Empress and Chrysostom are still good friends. She's young. She has an enthusiasm for the Lord, really to such an extent she participates in an all-night vigil in the cathedral, Hagia Sophia, because new relics have come. And they are in state there in the great church, all-night vigil. She's there by the relics. And not only does she attend the entire service, but at dawn, she and the crowds with Chrysostom, they all participate in a 9-mile procession to a reliquary 9 miles out of town where these relics are going to be deposited. And Chrysostom, if I could just mention, could I give a little sample of his joy here? This is what he preaches at the reliquary after this 9-mile procession. What can I say? How shall I speak forth? I'm leaping with joy. I'm beside myself with an ardor better at this moment than temperance. I'm flying, dancing, floating on air. So intoxicated am I. with spiritual pleasure. What can I say? What should I speak about? About the strength of the martyrs? About the eager desire of the city? There were thousands here in this procession. About the zeal of the empress? Yes. About the gathering of the magistrates? About the disgrace of the devil? The defeat of the demons? And so on. He's in rapture that the empress has been right there by the relics in this whole procession. So that's the joy that comes forth in that sermon. Then let's see what comes next. And by the way, he has very powerful words about how powerful the relics are. He refers to them as lightning flashes, terrifying the devil. Even more important than the Ark of the Covenant that David danced before. He's reminded of that scene. But we don't have stories of people touching the Ark and getting healed, and demons getting exorcised. But we do have stories like that. Those things are happening through the power of Christ embedded in the relics. See that? So he talks like that. Oh yeah, the next one. I wanted to quote from this bit too. Homily on his return from Asia. This is in the year, I think it's that same year. He has, he's away from the city for about 3 months down in Ephesus. He misses all of Great Lent. He misses Pascha, Bright Week. And some of his people are upset. John, why weren't you here with us? Bishop John. He explains he just had to do that duty, be away from them for that time, but he was always in their hearts. And this is what he says in this sermon upon his return. I too am a slave to your love for me. You purchased me, not by casting down silver, but by showing forth your love. I rejoice in this slavery. May I never be loosed from it. For this slavery is better than a crown. This slavery procures the kingdom of heaven. This slavery is better than freedom. This slavery prepares for me a throne at the last judgment. And this slavery is not a matter of compulsion, but of free choice. Who would not gladly serve you as a slave, since you are such mad lovers? If I had a heart of stone, you have made it softer than wax. And he also says in that sermon, I feel like I have come back to my paradise. So that's the relationship he had with his people. And then we know, as we know, he was sent off into exile, totally illegally, totally egregiously. Long story there. We have his words that he says before his first exile. So that's the 8th one in this series. And then miraculously, amazingly, he is brought back from that exile. He knows, the people know, the empress had turned against him for various reasons. She was really one of the main ones who had him sent into exile. She probably had a miscarriage 1 or 2 nights after she sends him out into exile. So she hurriedly calls him back. She sees this as God's retribution. Even with all that in mind, in this last sermon in this collection upon his return from exile, let me just read the very last part of this. He's still more than giving the benefit of the doubt to the imperial couple. He says, so let us invoke God. Let us highly esteem the church. Let us remain steadfast in prayer, lest having been delivered from disasters, we become foolishly complacent. Up to this day, we have prayed for deliverance from disasters. Now let us give thanks to God, and let us now be zealous for the good that that we have received. I extol your wisdom, and I also praise the foresight of our imperial rulers, for they have shown more concern about dissensions in the church than about any war, and more solicitous for the well-being of the church than for that of the capital city. So he's thanking them that he has been brought back, even though they were involved with his being sent off. I think there we see his heart again, just, amazing. Forgiveness. And it's really part of his, one of the greatest themes of his preaching, not only bearing suffering nobly, but also kind of linked with that, the tremendous emphasis on forgiveness. Not only the need for us to forgive all those who may ever be hurting us for our own spiritual health, but also then his deep, profound understanding of God's forgiveness, and how even if we've reached the very limit of evil, he will say, don't despair. Do not despair. God's love is far greater than your evil. So the great, profound understanding of God's love and forgiveness.
So the volume, while providing a kind of biographical,
it does,
of his life, also gives you this inner dimension of his understanding of the gospel, his understanding of Christianity.
Deeply.
A wonderful portrait. I mean, for somebody who did not write a autobiography, nothing like the Confessions of St. Augustine.
Yeah, true.
To have a collection that gives you a biographical overview in conjunction with the inner life and the scope of his preaching, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is rare. You were saying kind of Chrysostom is unique in some ways. I don't think we have an avenue like this into the very heart and soul of one of our great church fathers, as we do here. It's such a gift. Yeah.
Yes, it's amazing that, and it's all done through preaching.
Yeah. And also somewhat through letters. We see the same spirit in those 17 letters to St. Olympia that he wrote from his second exile, right. Which did not, he was not summoned back and died 3 years later in that exile.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Ford, I want to invite you to reflect a little bit and maybe tell our viewers why we should be reading these preachers from the 4th century. We have brilliant theologians today. We have people who are very smart and have PhDs. And why do we go back to figures like St. John Chrysostom?
I think the first thing we could say is human nature has not changed. Our temptations, our passions, our longings, our joys and sorrows. It's the common lot of humanity ever since Adam and Eve. And the fathers know the human situation so deeply. Their wisdom is ageless, eternal, because our human nature has not changed. And they are so full of the love of Christ because they have experienced it. The wisdom of the Holy Spirit, the bliss of communion with the living God. This has absolutely enraptured them, and they're overflowing with that joy that they are so eager to share that wisdom with everyone who will listen. So, of course, many times their writings emerge from people asking them, do you have a word from the Lord? Can you share some of the wisdom that you've gained through the scriptures? And then, as I'm emphasizing, their own personal spiritual experience that flows out of the wisdom they gain through the Holy Scriptures. It's such a treasure. So on every aspect of life, they have wisdom. and they're like a guiding ship in the dark. There's safety on that big ocean liner. The continuity of the teaching, of course, is so impressive over 2,000 years. It's another dramatic confirmation that this has to be the true faith. With these fathers amplifying the ones that have gone before. Every new saint's life is like another ring on the same tree, compounding the wisdom through the ages. And in one way or another, of course, we need to address our contemporary problems, unique as they may be, but we have this wealth of basic knowledge of humanity, of the human struggle, that can guide us as we consider our contemporary issues. So,
Professor Ford, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Taking time out of your schedule and for introducing us to these sermons and this biographical journey through the life of St. John Chrysostom. Through his preaching, it was a real pleasure to speak with you. We look forward to sitting down with your new translation, Sermons from the Life of St. John Chrysostom.
Great.
The book is now available from St. Vladimir Seminary Press.
Yes.
Those of you who are watching, go out and buy a copy. If you can't afford it, please cancel your Netflix subscription, skip a few coffees. It's definitely worth having. Dr. Ford, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tikhon. Thank you.